everybody out there in YouTube land. This is your T-shirted historian, and here we are with another episode of Dungeons and Discussions. And I have a very special guest with me tonight, one that I've had to pretty much coax for a few months now, actually, almost better part of a year or two. But here we are with the RPG Pundit.
Hello.
How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm surviving, man. I am surviving. All right. Well, we've got all kinds of stuff we could talk about tonight. I want to give a shout out to the chat right here. How are y'all doing, guys? We've got Dueling Dragons, who is got a Kickstarter going. You need to check that out for Ares. We've got Victor, better known as the Stay Puffed Marshmallow Man. It's good to see you. Or Stay Buffed Marshmallow Man, I should say. We have Indigo Dragon, who stopped in early. So he's been wanting to catch this one all the way from the beginning. Nice to see you. Hello, Daniel. Thank you very much about the intro. I appreciate that. We have Animane. There's my video man right there. We have a new guest on here, Sad Wings Raging. How are you? Wow. Apparently we have an orc friend here.
I know Sad Wings.
Oh, okay. Okay. He's one of yours. Okay. And Decepticon's Cave of Villains. Hey, Decepticon. Nice to see you. I didn't even know you were into RPGs, man. All right. Well, we'll just say hello to everybody as they come in. But just to start with, let's get some general questions down the road. You've been at this for quite some time. How long have you been actually writing for RPGs?
Writing RPGs? Since,
writing for them.
Well, since about the early 2000s. Anyway, 2006 or so, I think.
Wow.
But before that, I was blogging about RPGs, right?
Uh-huh. So pretty much you're kind of a lifelong gamer like me?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
I've been gaming for, what is it now? Well, almost 35 years, I think.
Impressive. All right. I'm about to hit my 39th year this year. But here in September or so. Not to dox my age. I think we're actually pretty much close to about the same age. But
Gen X.
Gen X, there we go, yeah. Oh, hey, Netherborn Games. It's good to see you. This is Anthony, who I've had on the show before. Waiting for his Kickstarter to show up at my door someday. I know it's rough getting published for the first time. Okay. When you actually started writing, I mean, I know you were blogging before then, but when you actually started your writing career, which game company did you start with, or did you just go independent right away?
No, I was independent right from the start. I kind of realized early on by the early 2000s, like there had been that implosion in the gaming industry that happened in the late 90s and the very beginning of the 21st century. And I saw which way the wind was blowing, right? And then when it became easier and easier to self-publish, because I'd seen this in other areas too, right? Like in some of my other work, that I realized that there was little point in becoming like the RPG freelancer guy that works, for hire for these big companies, was on the way out and increasingly was going to be less successful for an RPG career than making your own stuff, And I never wanted to really like work in an RPG company where somebody else would tell me, well, you have to write this and this and this, I wanted to make my own stuff right from the beginning. So I ended up, but I never made my own because I'm not a publisher, right? I just like to write. I don't like to do any of the other stuff involved, and I'm not good at it. So the very first publisher that I worked with was called Flying Mice Games, who are still around and make a lot of very interesting RPGs, though mainly not OSR or D&D type RPGs, but some very interesting ones. And so I made a game for them called Forward to Adventure, which that's a long way back.
Wow. Okay, so 90s. So pretty much you're talking like the OGL craze, the 3.0 craze.
That's right. It was right around the time of the D20 boom. Yeah.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Although my game wasn't that. My game was an early attempt at a proto second wave OSR game, at a time when the OSR was really just a group of guys that were making sort of copies, clones of the original D&D rules. And, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make a game that was, based on the old school principles of D&D, but did some stuff differently. And it wasn't very well received at the time by the OSR, because they thought, the OSR is just, you make copies of the original rules and then you make like modules and things like that, right? So that was before the lid got blown open on the OSR, largely thanks to Lamentations of the Flame Princess, and then everybody started doing that. So I was a little bit too ahead of my time at that moment.
Yeah, I remember that OGL 90s boom, because I worked at a game store at that time, and of course we had lots of printed material up on the shelves, and every week we would get in a new 3.0 product or eventually 3.5 products. And it was crazy.
Like 95% of them were just crap, right?
Yes.
Now the other 5%, there was some good stuff in there, without a doubt, right? But so much of it was trash,
I still remember our GM just deciding to let us just do open book and just giving us, just use whatever you want to from any of the stuff that's on the shelf. And boy, did the games get weird, because it's pretty obvious that either people didn't play test a lot of the feats and things, or it was pretty obvious that people could take certain spell combinations, feat combinations, and just totally break the game.
Right. Well, the curious thing about the development of third edition is that the mechanical concept of third edition was almost set up to do that, right? It was a game explicitly part of the idea behind Cook and Tweet's creation of the game, and this was of course mandated from above by Wizards of the Coast, which I think at that time they weren't part of Hasbro even yet. It was still Peter Atkinson that was in charge. Was to he wanted them to make a game that rewarded system mastery. So what that means is that if you're one of these obsessive nerds that would buy the books and read them over super carefully and plan out your character, in terms of what feats and what skill points and, what spells and powers you were going to take from like level 1 to level 20, and you already knew exactly what you were going to do because you were going to pick stuff to like maximize the ability of the guy, you were going to end up with a character that was vastly, vastly better than a character made by someone who had kind of read a little bit of the book but didn't really know the system, The idea was that if you encourage that kind of obsessiveness in 3E play, it would mean more people would end up, to be able to compete in the game, would end up buying and reading the books themselves, But the problem was that when you flood the market with new feats and new spells and new magic items and all that, it very, very badly rule bloats and basically breaks the game's playability.
Yeah, that is kind of a complaint I've had for some time now. It's like, on the one hand, I think it is really cool that they codified every single aspect of every single rule. I mean, pretty much if there's any question you have about anything happening in the game, from creating magic items to spells to whatever, there's something that covers it. The unfortunate thing is that it is so rules crunchy that in my mind it kind of inhibits some of the player freedom, because you're not able to freeform your actions and stuff as much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it also means that you're not making the choices for character creation or character leveling growth, right? Based on, what type of character you want to have in the world. You're basing it on mechanical gameplay mastery,
Yes.
And that's not good from my point of view.
No, mine either. But we're still using it. We've been using it since I guess 2000 or so, and
you're still running third edition.
Yeah, we're still playing third. I'm not so much running it myself anymore. But the GM that I play with is it is using like a hybrid of 3rd edition and Pathfinder 1st edition, with a few extra tweaks and stuff thrown in for his own benefit. But yeah, I have to admit that was one of the things that was crazy about that 3.0 was the fact that they created so many prestige classes, and it shoehorned your character development pretty badly, because you had to hit these exact marks in order to get into the prestige class. So that meant planning your character out from the very beginning.
Yeah, exactly. So you had to meticulously prepare the character and make choices based on being able to access the things you wanted to have for power, rather than how you wanted the character to be in the world.
Yes, exactly. That was one of the things that I think Pathfinder 1st edition did a whole lot better, was when they introduced archetypes. It blew the door open for the kind of character that you wanted to build, because now you had customization at such a level that combined with the most of the previous rule set, that you pretty much you had a solid game. I mean, just all the way around, you could build any kind of character you wanted to, and depending on how far you wanted to push the system, by integrating 3.0 and 3.5 stuff, we've had all kinds of combinations. We've had monster PCs with all kinds of archetypes and things applied to it. So the power gaming side of it is insane. But that's what my GM likes to run. So I mean, if he's okay with it, we like to play it. So.
If you have fun with it, I guess that's the main thing.
Yeah. But the thing is, here in the last year or so, I've gotten very tired of it on a personal level, because maybe it's the grass is greener on the other side, but I have found myself gravitating more and more towards OSR clones, copies, and all that sort of thing. And the more I started researching those, the more I started realizing it's like the OSR was actually a pretty good system all by itself. I mean, because it didn't define a lot of the rules and stuff, but it put a lot of the power back in the GM's hands. And in a way, it also kind of helped out the player base too, because you're able to do more as a player. You could be a little bit more nebulous with your actions, because you're not limited by a set of skills or anything like that. Instead, if you want to just say, okay, well, I'm going to listen at this door or something like that, GM can make an arbitrary check if they want to, or not have to make a check.
Yeah, absolutely. It opened up in traditional, let's say, D&D, you weren't defined by what special powers you took, right? Because that wasn't the way that you would engage in character growth, because in basic D&D or AD&D, your characters, 2 fighters are going to level basically the same way. There's no special variations, So instead, what made you special as a character was defined in role play. Now, in some of the OSR games, that's different. And one of the things about the OSR that makes that is so different from the D20 boom products is that if you look at those, there are thousands of D20 third-party products, but all of them were structurally very, very similar. There was very little experimentation going on of like interesting new mechanics or variations on the theme. Instead, it was all just kind of like, I think one of the epitome of it, I forget the name of which one I'm thinking of, but there was like this superhero game that came out relatively early in the D20 boom. And it was literally just the D&D classes remade into like the flimsiest of facades of a superhero archetype, So like
Silver Age, I think it was like Silver Age City or something.
Sentinels was a little bit better than that, because it at least had like actual superpowers that you point by, right? But and same with Mutants and Masterminds. But it was another one. It was one that was earlier. It wasn't very successful, obviously, because it was such a crappy concept. But it was basically like this superhero is the fighter, this one's the thief, this one's the wizard, and this one's the cleric, like, and it was like just such a lack of creativity. Whereas with the OSR, once the second and third waves of the OSR hit, you have such an amazing amount of playing around within this framework of the old school with this whole variety of mechanics. And I think that's something that is really special, because it means that you have all these games that are basically compatible with each other, but that have all kinds of different ways of doing classes and subsystems and, special mechanics for specific parts of the theme or the setting that OSR product was made for. And you can like mix and match a lot, right? Like, so you can take stuff from sci-fi OSR and put it into fantasy, and take stuff from different types or levels of fantasy. And so it's incredible how much more creative the OSR design hobby became versus the D20 boom. And I think in the modern era versus the like DM's Guild third-party 5th edition products, which are not, for the most part, all that innovative either, right? They want to stick to looking familiar to the people who play the big mainstream game. The OSR isn't limited in that way.
Yeah, and something I've been seeing here lately is there are a lot of games that appear to be trying to take advantage of the 5e rule set when they kind of don't really have any business doing it, in my opinion. I mean, it's like Dark Souls is going to be using 5th edition, and I'm just like, I don't understand why you would do this. You have a perfectly good role-playing system that's already been developed in Japan, along with the system that the game itself is built on, which is mostly percentile-based from what I can tell. And you're going to try to shoehorn it into a 5th edition where the play style and everything is so radically different. I mean, if you know anything about Dark Souls, I'm
not really familiar.
Constant. Okay, well, death is a very constant thing that happens in Dark Souls, and it often happens kind of in a silly way, or you just get overpowered. Bosses tend to be very big and will kick your butt pretty frequently, but even smaller opponents can be a challenge because it's very organic in nature. So you're basically trying to shoehorn the organic role-playing video game into an actual TTRPG with pre-established rules, and I'm just not sure how that's going to work.
Well, you have to be really creative with game design to make that work, right? Like, shoehorning is exactly what you don't want to do in that situation.
Yeah, and Bruno's Geek Reviews shows, Doctor Who 5th edition, there's that. I thought originally they were going to make the G.I. Joe game 5th edition and the Power Rangers and Transformers games 5th edition, but apparently Power Rangers is using its own setup, which is similar. So, but...
Sorry, I had a little meatball-related technical issue there. She knocked off my my screen. All right, I'm back now.
She wanted you to pay attention to her.
Yeah, well, she has this habit of sitting on the ledge of my office balcony, which is on the opposite side of my screen, right? And she'll sometimes lean in against it, and it'll unplug one of the plugs that connects the monitor. So everything went dark there for a second. I could still talk, but I couldn't see what was going on. So. But it's all right now.
While we're kind of at a lull here, we had a question come up from the audience from Ironcast. It says, Pundit, I was curious about what bestiaries you use for running your own games. You don't reinvent the wheel and stat new monsters for your books.
Well, as a matter of fact, I I do in a lot of my books have monster sections. Lion and Dragon has a bestiary chapter, and I've written a couple of RPG Pundit Presents books that are also monsters specifically for medieval authentic, Lion and Dragon play, which they're all based on actual, medieval myths and legends. So in Lion and Dragon, I have like the more mainstream ones, right? The ones that are a little bit more approachable, maybe, like there's trolls, but they're not the D&D trolls, right? They're like the Norse trolls.
Ooh.
And everything else I presented, like the undead, are the way that the medieval people understood undead to behave like. And, you know, an Invisible College, I have a bestiary, which is mostly of like supernatural entities and things like that, as well as NPC opponents. So I do make my own stuff, but I also like, in my games, I will, you know, one of the wonderful things about the OSR is its compatibility, its cross compatibility. So there are times when I'll like pull out the first edition monster manual and use something from there, or I might like from some other book that I like, you know, depending on what I'm playing and where the characters are at. I mean, when I'm running World of the Last Sun, my Gonzo game, I'll bring in stuff from everywhere, you know, like from any D&D related product that I think is going to be interesting.
Yeah, then I like doing that too. It's one of the joys of having OSR. I'm currently running Castles and Crusades, but it's OSR compatible enough to the point where I've had no problems mixing and matching and plugging things in.
Yeah, it's super easy.
Yeah, whereas I might have had difficulty with, you know, another system. Yeah. I went ahead and pulled it out because this is a great book. I've been enjoying this.
If you're a D&D player and you look at that bestiary, at first glance, you're like, oh yeah, okay, these are just the same monsters that are in, you know, the monster manual or something, right? But they're not. They're the medieval version of those. You know, so there's they're all kind of going to look a little different to you because they're not inspired by D&D, which is, you know, its own weird thing. Because D&D had those, you know, D&D has a basilisk, for example, but and a unicorn and what have you. And in some cases they're similar, but there's important differences too, you know.
Oh, and here's the troll right here. Well, I mean, there's no illustration, but yeah, that 6 die 8 hit dice and 16 AC. That's a pretty stout critter.
Yeah,
and,
well, especially in the dragon. Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't sound so powerful like in, say, in 5th edition, but for OSR, that's not going to be an easy kill.
That's right.
And it's immune to non-magical weapons except silver, and even if they're slain, they do come back to life with full hit points in 3d6 rounds, unless they're exposed to sunlight, in which case they turn to stone. Which that's awesome. That kind of harkens some Tolkien there as well.
Yeah, well, Tolkien was greatly inspired by both Anglo-Saxon and Norse myth, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's the same thing. Like the giants that I have there are, you know, Norse giants, and you know, I borrow from in Lion and Dragon. I borrowed mainly from Celtic, Norse, Anglo-Saxon, and then some continental European sources. You know, and like the really weird creatures I reserved for my RPG Pundit Presents issues, which are, let me see if I can find them. I never remember which issue is where, right? But
I've got a few of them on PDF, but
right. So RPG Pundit Presents number 94, the Medieval Authentic Bestiary, and then 98, Medieval Authentic Bestiary 2, right? So each of those have, like, I don't know, about 15 or 16 monsters in them that are all like based on medieval creatures, medieval fantastical creatures from medieval sources. And some of them are really weird, like strange stuff.
Are they, are either of those in Old School Companion 2 or?
No, they're Old School Companion 2 is only the adventures, right? And so these ones are not in either of the Old School Companions yet, because Old School Companion 1, which just became a gold bestseller, by the way, Old School Companion 1 is a compilation from like between RPG Pundit Presents number 1 to number 50 of all the medieval authentic non-adventure books. And then Old School Companion 2 is a compilation of all the adventures so far published for the medieval authentic stuff in RPG Pundit Presents. And eventually, someday, but I don't know when, it might be a couple of years from now still, there'll be an Old School Companion 3, which will have all of the medieval authentic sourcebook stuff from RPG Pundit Presents 51 and up, right? All the remaining ones.
So I'm gonna have to pick up that bestiary.
Yeah, the 2B series are not in either of the compilation books.
All right. Oh, by the way, just want to give you some kudos. Yeah, my puppy likes your books too.
Oh.
I was so upset when I saw her chewing on it. What am I gonna do? I'm not gonna get mad at a puppy. I mean,
that's the problem with hardcovers, you know. Yeah. I've had my cats scratch up some hardcover books, so you know. That happens.
Well, I mean, we should probably just jump into this then. I have to admit there are several of the things that you published that go extremely well together, because Lion and Dragon fits with Dark Albion and the Old School companions to make a big wealth of resources and knowledge that GMs can use to run a medieval authentic campaign. It is spectacular how in depth that goes, and I'm speaking from a historian standpoint as well as a GM standpoint.
Well, thank you. You know, I was going to ask if you were actually a historian, or if that's just your YouTube moniker.
No, no, I'm actually a college teaching historian, so you know I'm at that level. But I do wear T-shirts because I'm a big guy.
Yeah, but I have questions about the idea of an adult person who isn't a day laborer wearing T-shirts, you know.
Oh, come on now. T-shirts are fun. Besides, you can really express your personality through T-shirts. I have quite a collection. But I've just never been comfortable with button downs and ties and all that sort of stuff. I've always kind of found that to be sort of stodgy and a bit boomer for me, I guess. I don't know.
Boomers were the ones that stopped wearing button shirts, you know.
That's true. That's true.
They're the ones that suddenly made the T-shirt acceptable for men over the age of 12, you know.
Yeah, that's true. I do remember, from the 50s and 60s where, guys would wear full suit and tie and everything, even in scorching heat. And I don't know how they did it back then, because air conditioning wasn't necessarily that prevalent.
No.
So I don't know. But more power to them. Those are some tough guys. I couldn't do it now. I got to have my air conditioning.
Well, I live here in South America, and most of the houses here don't have air conditioning. I don't have it.
Yeah.
You adapt. You adapt to the heat.
Is it cool enough there to be comfortable, or?
Well, I mean, depends on what your comfort level is, but here it's sufficiently south that you end up having seasons, right? So we do have a winter where it gets down to be, fairly cold. It never gets below freezing, right? But it can get down to maybe like what would be 41 degrees Fahrenheit or so,
Wow.
in the coldest part of winter. But like, for example, right now it was today was a high of 85. So, and this is already autumn here, right? So in the summer you get 30+ degree weather for almost every day unless it's raining.
Yeah, whereas it's like 79 here.
I have to say, so like 85 and up, right? In Fahrenheit.
Well, kind of to gush a little bit more about this.
Sorry,
Pardon?
I went on a tangent there. Sorry.
No. Tangents are fine. We do it all the time. Sidetracking is, it's fine in conversation, just like it is in gaming, as far as I'm concerned. I tend to run more sandbox style instead of published adventures, although I do use published adventures kind of to add flavor to things. Like I'll use snippets and parts of them. But I have yet to successfully run a complete module from beginning to end, because players just they want to kind of get off and deviate from the main quest so much. It was kind of like let's just do sandbox and not worry about it. If they ever get back to this adventure, they'll do it.
There are sandbox type modules, a lot of, in the old school companion too, there are some adventures there that are fairly linear, but a lot of them are kind of like, they set up a scenario with an environment and there's kind of a timeline of events. But then the players can go move around and do whatever they want to do in whatever order they want to do it,
Yeah, I like that kind of format. Not to give away anything, but yeah, I prefer that. When GMs kind of leave it open, that makes it harder if you've got, like, let's say a mystery or something, because then it requires players to hit specific beats or find out certain pieces of crucial intel in order to advance the plot. Otherwise,
Well, that's true, but I do that a lot actually in a lot of my modules here, where you have quite a few of the modules are investigative, right? Especially the ones that are like at the last few in the book that are from the Occult Killer Antagonist series of Pundit Presents books. And the way that the way to handle that, right, is that you have a setup of, there's this mystery, somebody's murdering people, or there's some cult or something like that. And so you can start to investigate. Players will find different ways to try to investigate, but then there's also things that will happen in reaction to what the players are doing, whether they're perceived as a threat. And there's the things that the antagonists will be continuing to do, right? So suddenly new clues open up. So player characters that are lucky or very, very clever might be able to discover information early on, but if not, they might end up discovering stuff later as events start to overtake them,
Now I'm kind of curious. You must have read some Umberto Eco.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
So Name of the Rose and that sort of thing with William of Ockham.
Foucault's Pendulum, yeah.
Uh-huh. Good
Foucault's
stuff.
Pendulum is a bit of an influence on The Invisible College.
Yeah, that is a really interesting book. The more you post that up on your channel, the more interested in it I've become. The only reason I didn't jump on that one like these other ones is primarily I like to run more fantastical settings or low fantasy, that kind of thing. So modern day was kind of like a immediate let's not do this. But
it's a leap for you, okay?
but the more you have talked about it on your channel, the more interesting it is. And I like the fact that there is some real world occult lore being used as part of the book.
I mean, first of all, you're right about this, the fantasy part. It is in the hobby, an overwhelming percentage of gamers play fantasy, and there's a lot of gamers that play fantasy and other stuff too, right? There's very, very few people that play only other stuff and not fantasy, but there are a few that play both, right? But there's a lot of people that only really play, fantasies. A lot of those only play D&D, and so even the measurement of success. Like I knew, for example, like the sales for Invisible College are going quite well. It's a silver bestseller already, but I knew that they would not have as huge a sales margin as Lion and Dragon, just because Lion and Dragon is fantasy and Invisible College isn't.
Mm-hmm.
But for the people that like modern fantasy or urban fantasy or what have you, I think Invisible College is an interesting product, because you think of like the most successful urban or modern fantasy RPGs, and it's like, well, there's Call of Cthulhu, of course, and there's Mage the Ascension, maybe, and a couple of the other horror themed RPGs and one or two other modern magic RPGs. And Invisible College isn't, it's in that genre, but it isn't quite like any of those, and it's got elements of like, GURPS Illuminati in it too, because it's got, it's a war between secret societies, and there are mechanics in high level play in the book for how you can like influence different parts of, regular culture through, basically infiltration and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of different ways you can run Invisible College. You can run it as kind of this street level campaign of fighting supernatural baddies. You can run it as like this higher magic campaign of exploring, the crazy weirdness of occultism, and you can run it as like this high level kind of international espionage / conspiracy game. So, but if you only play fantasy, then you might find some of that a little bit unappealing. But there's still a lot of material in there in terms of the magic stuff that you can probably port into other OSR products, because just like everything in the OSR, it's compatible, right?
Right. And actually, as you described it on your own channel, what got me curious about it was I wondered how easy it would be to, let's say, run a more or less a historical fantasy type old school game, like let's say Lion and Dragon, where it's very low magic to no magic, and the things that are supernatural are generally horrific, out of the norm, and not usually a sight seen by people. But I wondered how easy it would be to transpose some of that book into Lion and Dragon, and say, your mage characters in Lion and Dragon are actually part of secret orders that are competing in various countries.
Yeah, you absolutely could. I mean, obviously in the medieval era, there were medieval secret societies. And in fact, I've written a couple of different Pundit Present books about that too, right? So, but they were very much smaller scale than the sort of thing that you see, like, when you get to the Age of Enlightenment, basically, or the late Renaissance, you could say, that you start getting these international movements like the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons and the Invisible College, after which the game is named, right? As well as other groups. So that happens later, you could say. But since you're talking about medieval secret societies, I've got RPG Pundit Presents number 89, Medieval Authentic Secret Societies, and RPG Pundit Presents 104, more medieval authentic secret societies. And those are based on real groups that actually existed in the medieval period.
Very cool.
Or at least that were rumored to exist, because in some cases it's kind of hard to prove whether they ever actually really existed or not, but that they were really from medieval sources.
And that would give me a good excuse to use this because this is brilliant. I love this so much.
Yeah, Cults of Chaos. That's one of the products in terms of design that I'm most proud of.
I love it. There is so much good stuff in this book, but I'm gonna say what I particularly love about this book is how you treat elves.
Oh yeah,
they're more like an alien species that are so far above human morality, and may have actually been responsible for creating the humans as a servitor race, and they're almost they're so bougie, I guess. Yeah. Would be a word for it.
This goes back to Celtic and other early European lore, right? That the elves are not the Tolkien elves, like that's well, I mean, they're sort of like the moment, like when Galadriel shows up, like that's kind of a really good depiction of a medieval elf maiden, right? But generally speaking, elves in medieval sources are these bizarre beings that look like us but don't act like us, and they have their own weird logic of things that they have to do or they don't have to do, and their elf encounters in medieval accounts are generally like with actual full-blown elves, as opposed to say like maybe little brownies or something like that, little sprites or something, but with actual supposed elves are always pretty damn terrifying, right? Because they can cause you to be frozen in fear. They can dominate your mind, you know, and then they can take you away to Elfland and replace your baby with a changeling and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, they're this, like, they are to the medieval world what like the gray aliens are to the cultural zeitgeist of the 20th century, you know. So they've got to, like, one of the things I really wanted to emphasize in the Dark Albion setting is that, you know, elves are not a player character race. They're these really freaky immortal creatures, you know.
Yeah, I like that a lot, and this kind of jives with a conversation Grim and I were having yesterday morning about people who play races, and I think you have kind of a similar opinion, and that is, for the most part, I mean, it's like so many games, you know, Pathfinder 1 and 5th edition have introduced so many different playable character races that, you know, there's so little detail fleshed out about a lot of the new ones that have come out that people are pretty much just putting on, you know, skin suits of other races and playing them like humans wearing horns or blue skin or pointed ears or something, you know.
I did a video on your channel about this. It's called "Your Favorite D&D Character Race Sucks Unless It's Human," and it's you know, you're totally right, because in terms of playing non-human races in fantasy, as a player character, you know, the only thing you can possibly be doing is you're engaging in a kind of cosplay, right? In a few cases, you know, when you're talking about elves, dwarves, maybe halflings, you've got these archetypal elements to them that are connected to sort of the older sources of myth that allow you to add a little bit more, but then they're still basically, you're playing them as kind of stereotypes if you're doing it right. If you're not, you're playing them as humans with pointy ears or humans that are shorter and with beards, right? And when you start talking about all this other shit, you know, like tieflings and you know, the genasi and whatever, all the weirdo races that 5e is full of, then you're literally just using the fact that it's a non-human race as a substitute for having an interesting character. You know, because if you're human, you have to make the character interesting on its own merits, right? But instead, if you're too lazy to do that, you're going to be like, oh, well, my guy has blue skin and, you know, he can see in the dark, and then, you know, and he's fabulous, you know. So like that's you know, that's a total time waster, you know. So like, now if you understand that, that non-human races, most people are just playing them as humans with funny colors, then in certain genres of play, like for example in gonzo fantasy, you can do that, right? But you need to then do it totally unapologetically, right? So in my World of the Last Sun, there's endless numbers of character races you can play, right? And especially when you add in the stuff in the Pundit Presents source books for it and stuff like that, you know, there's all these varieties of mutants which are more common in the world than humans. So they're like, but they're basically, you know, the mutants are mostly like, you know, they're humans but their skin is bright red, or they're mutants, they're humans but they only have one eye, or stuff like that, right? And then there's all these other races too. You know, you can play an intelligent animal in World of the Last Sun if your DM lets you, right? You can play almost that. You can play a robot in theory, right? But the important thing is that in the World of the Last Sun, they all basically act like humans, right? They act like humans, maybe with slightly different particular culture quirks in some cases, which often have more to do about where the character is from than their species exactly. And that's it. And then you play it for laughs a little bit, you know, like that basically, you know, there's all of these different, there's millions of intelligent races in the World of the Last Sun, but they all act basically like people, you know, and that's fine. In a gonzo game, that works perfectly well. But if you're trying to do that in a serious fantasy game, it's crap, right? It ruins the entire epicness of the mythic base of fantasy.
Yeah, I've actually been using this for my own campaign. I've cribbed parts of it. I like the High Bay City myself. That's a fun place.
High Bay, the city of stoners.
Yes, I love that place. But yeah, it's like that was one of the things we were discussing too, is the fact that Pathfinder First Edition came out with the advanced race guide, and then later on a whole book full of races. And although I'm very happy to have lots and lots of racial options just to make something different, 9 times out of 10, what I saw myself and other players doing with the new race books and stuff like that was, instead of actually playing them as fully fleshed out races with their own alien thoughts and feelings and stuff and how they relate to the world, they were just a convenient set of stats for min-maxing, oh, okay, I want to be a strong fighter, so I'll pick this orc because it's got a +4 strength, or the Suli Jin or whatever.
That's largely, from the point of view of a mechanical gamer, that's the only reason to pick a race, right? Is that it'll give you certain bonuses or special abilities. It'll make you a better wizard or a better fighter or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm. But now what the thing with 5th edition is, they're actually eliminating all that.
Yeah.
So you literally are just putting on a skin suit.
Because in 5th edition, the whole point isn't that. It's to be, to show off whatever your individuality is, to show how diverse you are by doing the same crap that everybody else is doing on Tumblr,
I'm not a big fan of Critical Role. I tried to watch the show a few times, and it honestly bored me to tears. But they did have their cartoon, that Vox Machina, and it was a fun cartoon to watch. I'm not gonna throw any shade on it, but what I did notice is you had a Goliath, you had 3 half-elves, and 2 gnomes in that party, so and 1 human, and I guess like he's the token, but but the other 5 races all pretty much just acted like normal humans. People. Yeah, they're just humans of a different stature or whatever. I mean, I'm kind of like, I know very little about Goliaths, but basically he was just the big dumb barbarian. Like, is that what all Goliaths are like? The half elves should have a longer lifespan and probably had some kind of problems growing up from being from 2 different worlds and 2 different races with completely different outlooks. But none of that was ever factored in. It was just kind of like, the plot is what it is. And the gnomes just seem like small people, extremely lecherous small people. So
yeah, it's pretty pathetic, actually. So that's why in Lion and Dragon you basically play humans. There's no other thing to play there.
Keeps it simple.
Yeah, but it means you have to develop a personality based on other things, right? And in Lion and Dragon, characters can be radically different because they're unlike almost any other D&D product. It takes things like social class really seriously, right? It takes culture really seriously, because these were things that mattered in the medieval world,
Oh yeah, and that's also where this book kind of is a little bit fun too, because I noticed that there are chaos mutations.
Yes, that's right. Well, corruption is being associated with the practice of dark magic is something super common in the medieval context, right? Like, going all the way down to the most basic, which is the witch mark. Like, how do you know a woman is a witch? Well, if she has like some kind of a deformity, that's part of the proof. So it was like, if you dabble in dark powers, you can get a lot of, you can become a very powerful and dangerous person, but you're also going to be twisted and corrupted by it. It's the corrupting power of sin represented in a physical form.
And let's see, we had a question up here. Let's see, Dueling Dragons it says, Pundit, where do you print your hardcover books? Overseas?
Well, the answer is I never print my hardcover books. Like I said, I'm only an RPG writer. I've worked with a number of different publishers. I've never published my own work ever, which is a very interesting thing, because some of my critics are, they claim, oh well, he's not a real industry insider or something like that, because he just publishes his own books. And actually, I don't publish my own books. I'm lucky that I'm sufficiently famous that other publishers come to me and ask to make a deal to publish my book, because they know even if they're sharing profits with me, they're going to make more money off that book than they would off of often their own books, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's been my method. I don't like doing any of the layout stuff. I mean, I wouldn't even know how to do any of the layout stuff. I don't know how to make a PDF. All I do is I write the text, and then I get a publisher, hopefully a really good one, to make the product look nice. And that's not my job. And so I have no idea where they're printed or anything like that. I'm sorry I can't answer your question, Julian, but that's just the way I roll.
Yeah. Now, all of my RPG Pundit books I bought through DriveThruRPG, and I use their print-on-demand service. So that is why they're printed. And of course, I picked best quality hardcover if I could, because I'm old school.
Good choice. Yeah, I mean, I have a few publishers that only publish on DriveThru. For example, Spectre Press, who are the current owners of the Pundit Presents series and the Old School Companion and World of the Last Sun books. They only work with DriveThru. And then I've got a few others, like, for example, the Invisible College, which is, Well a Bird Press. They publish with DriveThru, but they also publish on Amazon and I don't know if somewhere else. And Dom Publishing publishes on Lulu too, like. These days, it's really easy because even if you're a publisher, like, you don't have to go and figure out your own stuff. There are delivery companies, right, like DriveThru, like itch.io, like Lulu, that will publish it for you, right? So they just have to do the layout. They don't have to worry about, getting a book to the presses or something like that.
Yeah.
And the wonder of print on demand is that nothing ever goes out of print anymore.
Yeah, and I know that here moving forward, I think that Wizards of the Coast is going to be pushing a lot of digital-only media, and I'm one of those old school people who tells people all the time, do not buy digital media ever. I mean, it's fine if it's included as an extra, like if you buy a Blu-ray movie and it happens to have a digital copy, that's cool. But don't just buy the digital copy. Buy a hard copy, because they can't change that. They can't alter it. Something I already experienced is, my D&D 5th edition books. I had hard copies of everything, of course, but all of the digital media that I had purchased through D&D Beyond has been altered. And it's constantly being updated for whatever D&D what Wizards of the Coast wants to do with their product. And on the one hand, that's a good thing, I suppose, if they're doing corrections. But
nowadays, most of the changes are ideological.
Yes, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I firmly believe that aberrations that eat people's brains and basically rape other creatures by sticking their tadpoles into their heads and turning them into more of their own kind are evil. I mean, in every sense of the word, because they're highly intelligent, and yet this is the way they reproduce. They choose to reproduce more or less like this at the expense of sentient people, and they still eat people's brains. And it's kind of like, I mean, on the one hand, I could see like that's really alien, but on the other hand, it's kind of like it's really hard not to look at that as being evil. Plus, they enslave other races.
It's because of the relativist, relativist mindset of the people doing the writing now, which is a big problem if what you're dealing with is supposed to be heroic fantasy, right? It can't really be heroic fantasy if there's no bad guys.
Yeah, and you need bad guys, and it's okay to hate bad guys and want to see them get overthrown. One of my favorite series that I read is Berserk by the late Kentaro Miura. It features it features at least one villain who is somewhat relatable, but is also at the same time hateable. but for the most part, the main characters encounter villains on a regular basis, and they're all pretty scumbaggedy. You know, there's you don't feel any pity or remorse for a great many of them, even if they do have somewhat bad backstories. It's kind of like, you know, they're still scum. They still need to be killed, and I'm okay with that.
Well, for sure. I mean, because that's a big part of the underlying cultural foundation of the RPG. You know, like RPGs that don't do that end up not working. You know, like I mean, there's the Dallas RPG or something like that. You know, like but
I heard about that.
Generally speaking, RPGs have right in the very core of their DNA the idea of adventuring and of the struggle of good and evil. I mean, you can, in theory, play evil characters, you can play anti-heroes, and you can play kind of self-serving characters, and that's all fine. And it doesn't negate the fact, though, that RPGs have, as part of their essence, this concept of a moral universe. And the moral universe, unfortunately, is what the people in charge of Wizards right now object to. You know, they don't want that. They're in defiance against God, if you want to put it that way. You know, so like but that's a real problem, because what we end up with then is stuff like, you know, the latest D&D adventure for Strixhaven, where you're having wacky adventures running a cafe, you know, like because they have nothing else to do. Or the one where you go to a crazy carnival, right? But they don't actually have. There's no opportunity there for some higher purpose to what the player characters are doing, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And while I do appreciate the fact that, you know, their Wild Beyond the Witchlight thing had, you know, non-combat ways to resolve a lot of these things. That speaks more to a lot of the role-playing aspects of it, rather than what Dungeons and Dragons was based on, which was, you know, it's you know, basically an upgrade from chainmail, which was wargaming. And, you know, no matter how much people try to cover it up by saying it's a role-playing game, it's a combat game. There's combat in it. I mean, you know, you don't necessarily have to break out the figures and go to town on the scale and everything like you used to in 3.0, but 5th edition is still very much based around the characters, their abilities, and the ability to fight.
Yeah, absolutely. So. And it's something that they're going to see the consequences of turning away from that. You know, like somebody had pointed out, like, I think it was the Strixhaven book on Twitter. They were saying, okay, well, you know, I think that the thing is that this isn't something that is meant to entertain us. It's meant to entertain kids and teenagers, you know, but that's not true. You look at the sort of stuff that they've got there with this, like, oh my God, so random and cutesy poo stuff and all of that. That's not what, you know, kids want to do. You know, like,
no.
Kids want to play first person shooters. You know, kids want to, like, you know, have great adventures and fight the bad guys. You know, like what they're actually catering to is this very tiny crowd of these basically Tumblr and Twitter people who mainly, like, if you look at the D&D hashtag on Twitter, what you'll see is that like 80% of the hashtag is people posting pictures that they've either made or themselves or commissioned of what their character looks like, you know, and I bet if you interviewed them, 90% of those people would admit that they've never actually played that character. It's just the character that they would like to play if they ever thought of actually playing D&D. You know, like it's all about like a dress up game for them, you know, and then to, like, you know, have kind of fun fanfic type wacky scenarios that happen, but that are like, you know, this is not for teenagers. This is for aging and yet superannuatedly infantile millennials. You know, that's their audience. You know, it's for millennials that feel like they are, like, life is just too much adulting and they want to go back to acting like they're the Muppet Babies or something. You know,
I agree. and I don't like the fact that a lot of people try to slag entertainment off as it's for kids. Like Star Wars is for kids, comic books are for kids,
Well, the
role
problem
playing
is that
games are for kids.
a lot of people who are saying that
Uh-huh.
are actually lying when they say it, right? Because when they tell you, oh, this isn't for you, this is for kids, you got to get over it. But it's not. It's like, Star Wars, the new movies were not made for kids. They were made for feminists in social media. Like that's their real audience. And when they tell you this is for kids, they're lying to you because they know that kids aren't going to like this, like, and they didn't. And this because the toys didn't sell,
Yeah,
So
the toys didn't sell, and at at almost $5 a comic book these days, kids aren't buying those.
Yeah, well, everyone's buying them, right? But the people cheering that current comic book industry are people who are, people who don't actually like comic books as they actually have existed, especially superhero comics, and would rather that those superhero comics didn't exist, right? And what's going to happen is that you get a pushback against that. So in RPGs, you have the OSR, and the OSR is producing actual gaming stuff. And so part of the reason why, like, some people thought, well, when third edition goes away, or rather when fourth edition ended, right? Because fourth edition was absolute crap. And because of fourth edition, you had the rise of Pathfinder and the rise of the OSR, right? Both of those games or game movements became really big. And a lot of people thought, well, when fifth edition comes along, the OSR might just die, right? And so might Pathfinder. Well, Pathfinder basically has, like, it lost a huge percentage of its market share because it was only meant to be a D&D alternative to the crap-tastic thing that was fourth edition, right? That wasn't even really D&D. But the OSR didn't die, and the reason for that is largely because it continues to make games that are focused on playability and on the roots of the hobby and what the hobby is really about, rather than this weird experimental stuff. And you're seeing the same thing happening, for example, in comics, where now there a lot of the indie published comics by people that have been thrown out of the comics industry are selling better, like on Kickstarter, right? They're making these huge Kickstarter successes. In fact, there's one that I could promote that's RPG related. I don't know how many of your viewers or if you yourself are familiar with there's a new superhero RPG called Ascendant that was done by Alexander Macris, the same guy who did Adventure Conqueror King. Cool. And that's been a very successful RPG project, but now they're currently doing an Indiegogo campaign for a graphic novel based on the kind of the world of that setting, which is called Ascendant Star Spangled Squadron, and it's in like its first day, it got triple of its goal, right? So it's already, it's got 29 days left, and it's already raised like almost $30,000, So it's
I remember. I remember something similar to that way back in the 80s. There was a game called Villains and Vigilantes.
Yeah, that had its own comic too.
Yeah, FemForce. Yeah, I've got quite a few issues of those. That was good stuff.
But so the thing is that opens up for an alternative media that is not like it's not ideological, right? Like, people sometimes confuse this because my games, for example, have nothing political in them, right? Because the part where I get political is in fighting the people that want to bring politics into the games, And so obviously my position in the games is that they're not about promoting some kind of ideology. They're about making really good playable stuff, not stuff that you buy to virtue signal, and not stuff that you buy just to collect because it's like the thing that is popular. It's stuff that you buy because you can use it,
Right. I 100% agree with you on that. And there are some great creators out there. Levi Combs in particular, I love because his stuff feels like the old 80s, gaming stuff. I mean, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's sleazy, but it kind of has a bit of that tone in some of his work, but it's also fun. And it honestly, it kind of makes me feel like, we're teenagers again, sitting around and, listening to heavy metal while we're, rolling dice and just describing how cool it would be to do these kind of things. And I love that feeling of nostalgia. And I guess it's kind of like a form of chasing the dragon as far as RPGing goes. But you were talking about Pathfinder falling off. I think part of the reason that Pathfinder fell off as hard as they have is because they decided to release Pathfinder Second Edition.
Yeah, terrible mistake.
Yeah, it completely changed up all the rules. I bought into it at the beginning, just a bestiary and a basic book to see what it was like. Tried building a character under it. Spent 3 hours before I decided, you know what, this is way too frustrating. If I'm having this much of a problem with it, there's no way my players are going to want to do this. So we just totally do not back Pathfinder Second Edition, and I don't know how they're doing.
Well, they made the same mistake that World of Darkness did. Like it's really funny because when you become suddenly really big as a gaming company, because D&D is in a moment of weakness, right? It then becomes very hard to get out of that when, to be able to succeed after that moment of weakness has passed and D&D has like renewed itself, which it has done over and over again over the years, right? It's constantly, D&D has constantly gone through periods where it started to really suck and then got better, right? And so if you were one of the companies that made it big because D&D really sucked, you have to recognize that you are no longer going to be big after it stops sucking. And the answer is never going to be, let's do a new edition. That's just the road to ruin, like what they should have done. And I said this in one of my blog entries at the time when they were talking about what's Pathfinder going to do. I said, what they need to do is pare down their whole industry, like bring down their reduce the size of their entire company, their production, be prepared to understand that they're not going to make as much money as before, and then focus on making products that are continue the Pathfinder line and that are maybe have more variation from the D&D standard, because you're no longer going to be able to directly compete with D&D, right? So be more creative, and that would have been the way to go. But they didn't. They even though they saw, like when Wizards of the Coast took over D&D, and World of Darkness at that time was huge, right? Like White Wolf was a gigantic company, and it had at one point 50% of the market share. And then, third edition, all the excitement about that quickly reduced that to about 30% of the market share. And their really dumb idea was, let's do the new World of Darkness. And that's very tempting because, of course, a lot of people will buy the initial books of the second edition, just because nerds are nerds, right? And they're completists, So they'll be like, I have to check out the new edition. And so they'll buy that, but then they'll realize it's not what they liked about it anyways, because you have to change stuff to have the next edition. And then they'll stop buying. And so that's when White Wolf plummeted, and eventually it broke, right? It went bankrupt. Yeah, and that's eventually what's going to happen to the people who publish Pathfinder too,
I agree. Now they do have Starfinder, and that is fun. And it's different, and it is kind of using, well, I'll be honest. Okay, Starfinder came out, and the first time I looked through the rule set, I told one of my friends, I said, if they make another edition of Pathfinder, it's going to look a lot like Starfinder, because a lot of the stuff that they did in this are fixes for the problems in 3.0 and Pathfinder. And sure enough, when they came out with Pathfinder 2, it's very similar to Starfinder in many ways. But I don't know if, space, science fiction, fantasy sells as well.
It does not.
I didn't think it did. But
it's a very crowded area to try to make a big product in.
Well, who do you think is actually ruling the roost as far as science fiction gaming at this point?
Now, geez, it's hard to say. I mean, the perennial constant in science fiction RPG is Traveller, right?
Yeah.
And so that's always been able to maintain itself. It's not necessarily always the biggest, but it's always there, you know. And Traveller has had some really good years lately because there's been multiple companies making Traveller stuff, you know, either directly, you know, the actual Traveller edition, the Mongoose Traveller edition, and then like the Cephas engine, which is like an OSR of Traveller, you could say. And so there, you know, if you're a Traveller fan, you've got so much to work with. But then, like in terms of big products, the one that should be in a dominant position is Star Wars, right? But I think that the latest edition of Star Wars is not doing anything, right? It hasn't done well. The last successful edition of Star Wars was the D20 revised Star Wars edition. That one did very well, you know.
I personally still prefer the West End Games one, the old D6.
Yeah, of course. A lot of people do like that one a lot. I liked the D20 version quite a bit myself, but you know, like if there is a science fiction game to dominate, it would be Star Wars if they got their act together. But there's a lot of, you know, OSR products that are sci-fi now too, and some of them, you know, Worlds Without Number is probably the most successful OSR sci-fi product. But you know, my own Star Adventure has done, you know, better than I ever expected, right? Because Star Adventure was just meant to be kind of a special product because it's RPG Pundit Presents number 100, right? So it was celebrating the fact I'd gotten to the 100th issue of RPG Pundit Presents. And it's only like 38 pages long. You know, it's a small book, but it's a complete RPG in those 38 pages. Not, you know, it's very streamlined, right? It doesn't have a lot of setting material or stuff like that. It's just basically a set of rules with an assumed setting within the rules, you know. But people loved it apparently. So it, you know, it's a gold bestseller and it's doing really, really well. It's and people keep talking about it. Just now, there's I don't know if you or your viewers are aware that over on itch.io right now, there's an attempt to basically infiltrate itch.io, which is usually like all the story game, you know, the pretentious people are there, but the OSR is trying to come in there and mess around on their turf. So we've got this thing going called the OSR Supplement Jam, which is the people that are participating in the Supplement Jam are presumably going to produce RPG supplements based on existing OSR games, right? So you might, you know, if you're a small time or a new RPG, you try your hand at some RPG writing, and you want the opportunity to be able to make a product that's all ready for an existing game, so that people will, you know, people who are interested in that game might take a look at your product. They've joined in and they're making, and so far it's just, you know, there's still half a month left before it's complete, and we've already got a dozen really interesting supplements in there, including one for Star Adventure called Star Adventure Mecha Assault, which adds mecha rules to Star Adventure. So if you're looking for adding mechas and power armor to a Star Adventure game, you'll probably like that, you know. There's also just more recently a Dark Albion adventure was published for it, and I forget what that one is called. Oh, they've got 16 entries now. It's called Milk and Blood, an OSR adventure for Dark Albion for first and second level characters.
Yeah.
And so, like, this is great stuff, and almost all the products that are there are pay what you like. But you know, I'd suggest that people give a few bucks and not just snap it up for free, because it's a good way to encourage new designers in the OSR.
Yeah, I agree. And I would like to see some more stuff for Star Adventure too. Is one of the reasons I brought it out. So if you ever decide you want to add more things to it, you know, please do.
Star Adventure is definitely something that I might end up making more stuff for. Yeah, I don't know when yet. It's not right at the top of my list, but I mean, I am a fan of sci-fi RPG, and Star Adventure is the type of sci-fi RPG I enjoy making. So I wouldn't be surprised if at some point I make more supplements or adventures or a setting book or something like that for it, you know.
Yeah. According to my friend Ironcaster, and by the way, he's the one who got me to buy Star Adventurer because he showed me his copy, and I'm like, okay, I gotta buy this. But he says that Fantasy Flight Games wrapped up their Star Wars role-playing game and now doing smaller war game stuff with that license.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if they wrapped up or if they lost that license, but anyway, yeah.
And he mentions Kevin Crawford's Cine Nominee's follow-up Cyberpunk game Cities Without Number. Yeah, I love Kevin Crawford Cine Nominee.
He does great stuff. Great stuff.
Godbound is one of my favorite systems to run. He's just one guy publishing everything too, but his stuff is just awesome.
Publisher, yeah.
Yeah, he is good stuff. I buy his books too. I need to get his Worlds Without Number though. Going back to kind of an earlier comment, I'm having to scroll back a bit there. Dueling Dragons Adventures, who publishes Ares. This is, yeah, it's a combat game for sure, but you can have non-combat sessions that advance heroic ideals, and those are sometimes better than combat. I agree. Definitely breaking it up with role-playing stuff is fun. I mean, I would never tell anybody, oh, no, we can't have combat. But at the same time, it's kind of like watching, a movie about, a fantasy movie. It's like, you can expect some character interaction and stuff like that, but eventually you do want to see some people throw down and get into a sword fight.
Yeah, it's true. But there are some campaigns where there's more of that than others, right? So like, a lot of it, because for example, in Lion and Dragon, combat is a bit more lethal. There's that inherently encourages players to be cautious about when they get into fights, and how they do it. And also some of the adventures that I've made for Lion and Dragon or Dark Albion are investigative adventures. So there's a lot of, kind of trying to decipher where the Chaos Cult is, or who the killer is, or political intrigue in the, War of the Roses or stuff like that. So I've certainly had a lot of sessions where you have very little combat, right? And some where you don't have any. And especially I've noticed, for example, in my Last Sun campaign, which has been going on for 9 years now, the Last Sun campaign, when it's based, I've run it with Dungeon Crawl Classics, right? And most people who play Dungeon Crawl Classics never get past kind of the 0 level character funnel, which is, I understand that that's fun, but that is way limited compared to what you get when you have DCC characters that are higher level, and now I've got, like the DCC characters in World of the Last Sun in that campaign are very high level. So if you go to like Bill the Elf's channel, where we have audio recordings of all of our sessions, and like the last session we played for 5 hours and there wasn't a single combat. I think that was the same thing in the session before that. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on, because you've got these really powerful characters that are now doing sort of world-moving things, but they're, the moments where they actually get into fights, those fights tend to be pretty quick, because either they're going to kick the crap out of anything in front of them, or, the thing in front of them is going to be potentially kicking the crap out of them,
Yeah, and the thing I see, and this is with pretty much all the level-based games, is past a certain point, past a certain level, it's much like reality. You have so much money that you could hire other people to go out and take care of these problems. You're not necessarily the one out there, raffle stomping the goblin invasions and all that sort of stuff, because you're busy taking care of big things like the machinations of Cthulhu or something.
In the original kind of D&D format, once you hit the higher levels, that was the time for what they called domain level play, right? Where you were presumably a really powerful person in the setting, and you might be a lord or something, and you might have your own stronghold, and then you have to like clear the land, and you have to protect it, and you have to get involved in political intrigues and stuff like that, So so it becomes a different type of campaign,
Yeah.
And there's other ways to do it. Like, for example, in World of the Last Sun, these very, very powerful characters that are now kind of like famous in many parts of that setting. For them, it's like they go around interfering in a whole bunch of stuff, but a lot of the campaign is what you could call picaresque, where they're they're just traveling around and going to places and looking at weird things and doing weird things, and sometimes that involves fighting, and sometimes it involves, all other kinds of hijinks, and that can make for a very interesting game, which is the sort of thing you can only do if you have characters that have very high power level and a lot of resources.
Yeah. You've got characters who are so powerful, it's like they can, dragons are no longer a threat for the most part. I mean, except for maybe exceptionally old ones or something like that. But I almost kind of wonder, a lot of the research says that most campaigns break up or break down at level 6, which is why most of the adventures and things are geared for up to level 6. And I kind of wonder if that's not part of the reason, because by the time you're hitting 7th and 8th and all that, your characters are so exceedingly powerful that, normal foes can't really challenge them. GMs get frustrated, and, you've been playing the same character for so long at that point, if you're playing OSR especially, maybe not so much with a newer D&D where the leveling is supposedly a little bit faster. But I think that fatigue tends to break down most games past 6th level. I've rarely ever seen a game get past 15th level at the highest. And I have never, ever, ever, ever seen anyone legit go from level 1 all the way to 20. Ever. I mean, it just never happens. Games break up, people move, players get bored with characters die, or whatever, maybe that's just me, but how about you?
I'm going to need you to repeat yourself.
The whole thing?
I don't know. I got cut off. Yeah, you were talking about high level play or something like that. Yeah, I got cut off for about 3 or 4 minutes there.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Sorry.
No. It's okay. Dueling Dragons. Well, he's right. You must not be bros or 180 sessions running. Yeah. Okay. Well,
yeah, like you were saying that the average campaign
breaks down at level 6. Yeah. And I've never legit seen anybody go all the way from 1st level to 20.
That's old data, my friend, because in the latest study that Hasbro did about this, the average 5e campaign is no more than 6 sessions.
Wow.
So, like, there's tons of people that have never played a campaign that lasts more than, I mean, and that means that there's a ton of people that have never played even 3 sessions of the same campaign. It's a big problem there, because it means that people don't actually get the full experience of the immersiveness of role playing. Because it takes you, I've always said, it takes you about a year of actual, constantly playing a character before that character takes truly takes on a life of its own, and playing in a world before that world actually becomes a real world. So it's it means that it explains why so many role players don't actually get what the point is of role playing, because they've never done it long enough to be able to get it.
Yeah, I could see why. Wow, I did not know 6 sessions. That's insane.
That's 5th edition players, right? It means that most 5th edition players haven't played most of the longer campaign books all the way through either, right? Like for 5th edition, right? And it's probably going to affect, that data is probably going to affect how Wizards presents its products after this, right? It's part of why, like, I think something like Candlekeep came out, that it's a series of short adventures rather than a long campaign arc sort of book, right?
Yeah, considering that, like, Waterdeep Dragon Heist and Dungeon of the Mad Mage and all that stuff are designed to take care. They're complete campaigns designed to take characters from level 1 to 20.
And that means that almost nobody playing 5e has done that. Like, it's It's quite remarkable. It means people are buying the books, but not actually getting to run through all of them.
Dueling Dragons says, well, there's a ton of people who are just tourists of 5e. They just want to try what they saw on YouTube and walk away disappointed because they don't understand it.
That's
also
right.
true.
That's absolutely true. Now, I've played several old school campaigns that have gone on for ages, right? Like I said, my World Last Sun campaign has gone on for over 9 years of fortnightly play. So I don't know exactly how much that would be in hours, but it's a lot, like, a lot of hours. And that's, that's not even the longest campaign I've ever run. So for me, a short campaign is a campaign that lasts 6 months,
Wow. Yeah. We've had campaigns that usually go for, 5 to 6 months, but we've had them last for years at a time if we're really having a good time with it. What tends to be kind of an issue with our own games is just player burnout or GM burnout. Either the players are, not cooperating, or they're tired, or they don't want to keep running the same character, or the characters have worked themselves into a situation where the GM is just frustrated and can't think of how to do anything else but end the game in order to...
there are times when a campaign, if it's an open-ended campaign, stops being fun anymore, right?
Yeah.
Somehow that hasn't happened with Last Sun yet, but because it just keeps being fun. But that's one of the craziest campaigns I've ever run. But for example, my original Dark Albion campaign, it had a set starting point and it had a set maximum end point, which it basically reached, right? Because it started with the beginning of the War of the Roses and got all the way to the end of it, 35 years later. So that's how they played it out in about, I think it was almost 8 years of real world gameplay. So it's good. So I do that a lot of times with some of my campaigns. I have a starting point, and then I also have an idea of what the end point is going to be if it gets there, right? Sometimes it won't get there because other stuff will get in the way, right? Like the players will get bored, or people's timetables don't work. Like I tend to get really dedicated players, so that's not often a problem. But once in a while, somebody moves out of the country or something, and then you end up having attrition of players, and after a certain level, it's hard to get new players to come in and be able to really adapt to being in the campaign. So sometimes that kills it. But I've had a lot of games that get to their end point.
Oh, that's good. Me personally, I broke out from my group a few times to play 5th edition with other groups, and I won't say there's anything necessarily wrong with the system itself.
Well, I hope not. I helped make it.
Yeah, as a system goes, it's fine. It is pretty heavily geared towards the players, but my understanding is that was the directive from the top. Actually, correct me if I'm wrong.
I guess it's time to tell you a bit some of the 5e design stories here. The top in 5th edition, the very top, Hasbro just said, stop hemorrhaging money, right? Like they'd lost with 4th edition, they had lost 2/3 of their market, right? 2/3, they had 1/3 of the number of players that they used to have, which is exactly what I predicted would happen. Like precisely, I said 2/3, right? And that's why when Mike Merles was put in charge of making a viable edition of D&D, I was one of the first people he talked to, right? Or one of the first several people he talked to, I'm guessing. It was Mike Merles was the one that was the chief architect of what he wanted the game to be like, and of course, one of the things about Mike was that he had been a long time reader of my blog, like right from the beginning, and in like the early blog back when it was on Zango, which doesn't even exist anymore. He would be a frequent commenter on my blog entries. So, I knew him like from way before he was working for Wizards. so we had similar ideas, right? And I told him, look, what you need to do is you need to get some of the old school spirit, but it can't be an old school game. It has to be something that is modern, but that captures some of that simplicity of the old school gaming. You don't want it to be a system mastery game, right? Like, we were aware of exactly what Monty Cook and Jonathan Tweed had done with third edition, and that had been, mandated to them from above, I believe, to focus on this system mastery. I might be wrong. Maybe it was their own idea, but I sort of suspect it was actually from above. And we realized, no, what we want to do is something that's totally opposite, and that is going to be potentially an evergreen product, right? Like, one of the things that was obviously not good for mainline D&D was the idea of constantly having to remake editions and remake, and put out new splat books and stuff like that, because that looks really appealing from a business perspective, because those will sell well at first, but it creates this death spiral, right, where it ends up, the rules bloat ends up destroying the system. So we wanted a set of rules that were going to be basically complete in themselves, super modular, which is the opposite of third edition, where the rules, like, if you're a DM and you try to house rule third edition too much, you end up finding all these little links of things, right? Like, if you don't like a feat and you say, well, I'm just not going to have that feat, suddenly there's a bunch of stuff,
it doesn't work.
Other feats, skills, attacks of opportunity, combat rules that, like, you also have to change radically just because that feat isn't there, So it's very tricky. And one of the goals in 5th edition was to have to make it super easy, actually, to change rules and to put in optional rules and to alter stuff and to take out entire things if you don't want to do it, right? It's like, feats in 5th edition exist, but they're 100% optional, right? You can play them completely without feats. And so, like, the concept fundamentally was to simplify the system and to make a system where people who do not obsess over reading the rules will be able to play, and they'll be able to have as enjoyable an experience as the guy who really reads the rules. They might enjoy it in a different way, but they're not going to be stuck with the shit character because the other guy knows how to build a character and you don't, right? So the mechanics are all set up in order to allow that. And we wanted to maximize what you could call the sweet spot, right? So it's actually the longest period of play in the game is the middle levels, where they get stretched out, so that it takes you a short time to get to the middle levels, and then the middle levels take a long time, and then after that it takes a shorter time in the higher levels again, because that's the period that I think is, like, usually the most enjoyable part of a long campaign, right? Is the mid-level play.
Yeah, I agree.
And so these are all ideas that the two of us were shooting at each other, right, and incorporating, and it required a lot of fighting with the internal company culture of Wizards, because a lot of, not just because of 3rd edition D&D and 4th edition D&D, you had some people probably in Wizards that even at that time that were kind of resentful that 4th edition didn't work and wanted to put in the same kind of weirdo mechanics that 4th edition had. But then you also had a whole bunch of people that were doing double duty, that were people that were also involved in Magic the Gathering, right? And were thinking in terms of game system complexity of stuff like Magic the Gathering. And so, there was the principle that I suggested that he has to apply into the company culture is dare to simplify, right? At every point to ask, can we make this mechanic simpler, right? And I think that's part of why 5e was so successful, is that it's a very, very accessible game. Now, it's probably not, except for maybe people for whom it's their first game, it's not going to be the favorite edition for anybody else, right? But it's going to be an edition that almost everyone else can tolerate to play, especially if or to run if you're a DM, where you can say, well, I'm able, if I really have to, I can run 5th edition, and I can also change a bunch of the rules, One of the really weird things that happened, though, is that we were really expecting that modularity, and in the DM's guide, all the kind of slew of optional rules and the idea that the DM can change the rules any way he likes, and that the system stands up to a whole lot of rules changes. We thought what was going to happen is that we were going to have like 1,000 points of light sort of thing, where every DM was going to like make their own house ruled version of 5th edition, and everybody was going to be playing their own thing, right? And that there would be tons of people doing, like, you know, on forums or maybe third-party products, making these house ruled or, you know, alternate rule versions of the 5th edition rules, right? So that the 5th edition would be the core, and then everybody would be able to modify from there. But that didn't happen at all, right? I was shocked by this, but it turned out that, you know, instead what people wanted was to like just, you know, like they wanted the rules to be what they are, and for like wizards, you know, for somebody like, what's his name, Jeremy Crawford, to tell them what they have to do in terms of rules, right? So that was a bit of a disappointment, but that doesn't change the fact that in the 5th edition core itself, you can do all kinds of house ruling in a game to alter, you know, like 5th edition, to make it super gritty, to make it more super heroic, to you know, to change all kinds of aspects of it. You can mess around with the classes, you can mess around with the monsters, you can change all kinds of stuff, and it'll hold up as a system, you know.
Yeah, the one time I did run a 5th edition game for a group of players who were also 5th edition junkies, I actually house ruled in something that I liked. I've always liked critical hits and fumbles. Yeah. And just by introducing that element to the game, they all thought that was very strange and alien, and I don't think they liked it.
Yeah, well, ironically, the people that started with 5th edition are super conformists, you know, like, yeah. I guess because it was, you know, the early 5th edition players were all millennials, and they just like being told what to do, you know, like, so they don't want to, they don't want anything that goes outside of their norm, you know, that's triggering, you know.
I guess I don't know what it was.
It's my biggest disappointment, you know, because I was really hoping that part of the OSR spirit, of the second wave OSR idea, you know, that it was going to like translate into 5th edition, and there'd be all these really weird and interesting variants that would pop up, and it just didn't happen at all. Yeah,
and you know, just throughout all my gaming experiences with different GMs and myself, you know, 9 times out of 10, I've noticed that it isn't necessarily the system that really makes the difference as to whether or not it's a good game. It's, you know, it's the guys running it and playing it, and how much enjoyment is being had. I mean, you could just make up rules on the fly really quick, like, okay, roll 2 die 6. Okay, that's going to be your to hit number, et cetera, and still make a game out of it as long as the game's fun. But
yeah, that is absolutely true, right? Because there was that school that kind of came out of the story gamers that said system is the most important thing, system matters, and every system has to be made for a very, very specific type of game, right? And that's pretty stupid. But at the same time, and you're right, you can do, like, if what you want to do is just something generic, and you can totally do it, you know, well, yeah, roll a d20 and whatever you get. Like, that's kind of the Venture Satanist school of game design, right? Like, he just,
I love that guy.
Yeah, I mean, like, he's been forced after repeated shaming to make his products actually OSR, you know, because for a long time he was like saying that this weirdo game that he made, like Alpha Blue or something, which is just like full of these weirdo random rules, is OSR, but it wasn't. It didn't have anything OSR in it. But he now is doing, like, Chalt is basically an ultra light version of D&D that is compatible with both the OSR and 5th edition, which is kind of clever, actually, right? Because obviously some people might, you never know, probably not, because, you know, 5th edition people don't tend to be Venture Satanist people, but they could run it, right?
Yeah.
And so you could totally do that. But then there's also a question of genre, right? Mm-hmm. And one thing that is true about design in terms of rules is that if you want to evoke specific elements of genre, you need to have rules that back that element, right? So if you've got like one of the classic examples of this is superheroes. Superhero RPGs are incredibly hard to do right because so much of what the superhero genre is about can't be reduced into a mechanized system, right? Like, in superhero comics, if Batman and Superman fight each other, you're not sure who's going to win, right? Like that's been a repeated theme in DC Comics, right? That
Right.
It should be that Superman should wipe the floor with him, right? But it isn't, because Batman is so incredibly clever and has all those wonderful toys and is like always 4 steps ahead of everybody else, and et cetera, right?
Right.
Putting that into an RPG where the Superman superhero and the Batman superhero are equals, and yet, the Shazam superhero is inferior to Batman, right? And the Nightwing guy is clearly inferior to Superman or something like that. That's really hard to make it hold up mechanically. And so a lot of superhero RPGs where they break down is that they still use like combat mechanics and power rules that are designed as though they were being made for a D&D type game, right? Where what matters is, well, how much hit point damage does it do? What conditions does it cause, etc. And it misses all of the kind of weird parts of the superhero genre.
I liked the old Marvel superheroes FOSSA RIP system the best for playing superheroes games. It was just nebulous enough that you could do that.
That's part of its enormous success, right? Whereas the DC heroes and even Villains and Vigilantes, which I kind of have a soft spot for, it had a terrible problem with that, right? Like, it was like basically like combat was like D&D combat, and that's not how superhero combat is supposed to look, So that's a tricky thing, but it's not, superheroes is a really extreme example of that with genre, but it applies to other elements too, right? So like with Dark Albion and Lion and Dragon, I have a setting. The setting of Dark Albion, if you're playing it with like D&D 5th edition or D&D 1st edition, and you don't change the rules, the rules and the structure and the classes and the spells are going to make it not really be sufficiently medieval authentic, right? Like in Dark Albion, because I published that first, I put a bunch of rules about how to change the magic system to like bring it down to a level where it helps it be more medieval authentic. But if in Lion and Dragon, I threw out the magic system completely and replaced it with the actual medieval magic the way it was done, which is largely ritual magic for magisters, for the wizards, and for clerics, it's the ability to create miracles, right? And that and the combat system, right? In Dark Albion and in a medieval authentic setting, you need to be able to have a situation where you have the greatest warrior alive, say Richard the Lionheart, the greatest badass of the 12th century, and he gets killed by a crossbow bolt shot by a 14-year-old kid, right? Like basically a zero level character takes him out with a lucky shot, And so if you're running a standard D&D game, you can't do that, right? It just doesn't happen. And so like I needed to change the combat to reflect that, to make it look more like the history of the War of the Roses, the history of the Middle Ages, where you had these total badass guys that get like murdered by a Kentish pikeman or something like that, and that makes it also more similar, for example, to the type of fantasy you see in Game of Thrones, right? Game of Thrones, you have these incredibly capable people, but that you never know, in any single fight they might just die, right? Because George R.R. Martin's a bastard, but also because that's a reflection of what a more gritty and authentic style of world should be,
Right.
So that's part of what I did. I have a critical system in Lion and Dragon.
I love that critical system.
Yeah, if you have a character that's like a 10th level character, a 10th level fighter, let's say, in Lion and Dragon, he's just a combat monster, right? And 9 times out of 10, he'll be able to just pave his way through a bunch of like 0 level peasants with spears, right? But if he's unlucky and someone scores a critical hit, he could take a serious wound, right? I've had characters in my Lion and Dragon campaigns that have, lost a hand, or that have like, ended up damaging their ear, losing their hearing. And of course, I've had some characters that just got outright killed by a lucky shot from an opponent that might not really have been their equal in any way, right? And that's that, plus taking away resurrection magic, making healing magic less common. All of that adds up to creating a setting where you have just the right balance of being able to play a guy that's really tough, and that you don't have to be scared that he's likely to die, but that he can, at the same time, even the highest level character can face low level opponents and might die, and that's a very important part of reflecting the mortality you want in a medieval authentic setting.
Yeah, I've had the very first Dungeons and Discussions I ever had with Grim. We talked about the cleric and how the nature of the cleric and the ability to raise the dead and all these other things is such a fundamentally strange thing, a phenomena in a fantasy game to begin with, just because of how it changes the nature of money and clerical politics and just what kind of an effect it's going to have on your world, and people just kind of overlook it like it's not even a thing. And I'm just kind of like, you realize what kind of repercussions having churches full of people who could actually cast all this divine magic, what kind of an effect that's going to have on a world.
So that's another thing. For example, in Lion and Dragon and in the Dark Albion setting, it's not every priest that does magic, right? Regular priests are just like in the real Middle Ages, just dudes that are fulfilling a social bureaucratic role. A lot of them might believe in, might be really devout Christians or followers of the Unconquered Sun or whatever. But a lot of them aren't. A lot of them, it's just a job, right? And even the ones that are devout don't have miracles, right? So clerics are like a special order in the Dark Albion setting that are like, living saints, right? They're people that have been chosen by God, and they're very rare, right? There aren't that many of them, so they're super special, and it means that they don't have that ubiquity that you would see in like the Forgotten Realms, where you got a mid-level character who dies, the rest of the party just takes him over to any temple, pays whatever 20,000 gold pieces, and suddenly he's back, right?
Yeah,
and suddenly
that's ridiculous.
Death and risk loses all of its sting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and also in the context of the clerics there, they not every cleric has the power to heal, right? Like low-level clerics, a first-level cleric has one miracle out of 8 possible miracles, and healing is only one of the 8, right? So only higher-level clerics are likely to have are more likely to have healing, right? So you can have a party where the cleric of the party doesn't have the miracle of healing. They might have turn undead instead, or they might have blessing or something like that, right? Now, if a cleric is super high level and they get all of the miracles in the that are all the standard miracles, then they also can directly pray to God for divine intervention, and they can do almost any kinds of crazy bullshit. So that's. But I've actually never had in the campaign a cleric that's gotten up that high. Like I've had clerics that have become very, very high level, but have never gotten all 8 of the miracles. So that's an extremely, like, those are like the most legendary saints alive in the world, right? That sort of thing.
And that's how it should be. That level of healing and ability resurrection and everything else, that should be reserved for very high level play. And
well, that's how it should be if that's the type of genre you want, right? Mm-hmm. Because that gets back to my point, right? Is that you need to make sure that the rules back up the genre you want to play, right? So if you want to play a Game of Thrones campaign or War of the Roses campaign in Dark Albion, it has to have the rules that allow for that kind of grittiness. Whereas if you're playing like some kind of super high fantasy campaign, maybe not, right? Even there, though, when you're designing your world, I agree with Grim, right? That you should think about, well, what are the consequences of resurrection and stuff like that, and so you want to like consider that in the social creation of the setting.
Yes,
which a lot of D&D worlds don't, right? They just think, that's
it's all fun. Yeah. It's kind of funny. This kind of draws me off into two different directions here. But it also kind of jives along with what you were saying on one of your videos previously that I also endorse, which is that the amount of magic in the setting can cheapen it, because, obviously in Lion and Dragon, you have, super duper powerful weapons for that setting. Although to a standard fantasy campaign, the character might look at that and just go, what a bunch of crap. What's that going to do to my +5 Holy Avenger, Because Excalibur's not a +5 Holy Avenger in the stats. But in that world setting, it is super duper magic because magic is such a rarity. And that is an element that I've always enjoyed. I mean, okay, just to give you some background, I grew up about an hour away from Robert E. Howard's house in Cross Plains, Texas. So I grew up reading Conan. And in all the Conan books, if there were spellcasters in the stories, they tended to be evil, or magic tended to have a very high price, and it was not something that was very frequently part of the story unless it was something opposed by Conan. And that is kind of like, I like my games to run in a similar fashion. Maybe that's just me, but
yeah. Well, and you have to do that, right? And of course, in some versions of D&D, especially third, you end up actually having to have necessary magic boosts past a certain level just to be able to function in the campaign, right? So at that point, when you get to that level of ubiquity of magic, and that was reflected in like the 3rd edition version of the Forgotten Realms, where every fucking village had a magic shop, like.
Oh, I hate
that. When you get to that, then magic stops being something wonderful. It turns into equipment. That's all it is. It's just equipment, right? So if you want magic to be special, you have to make it more rare.
Yeah, my GM years ago when I first started under his games, and I was still kind of a young guy at that point. I was like 18, 19 years old. He didn't hand out a lot of magic items. And at one point I asked, well, why don't you hand out very many magic items? Because I'm used to, modules that have like tons of magic items and stuff like that for handing out to players. He says, well, here's the problem. If you play the game and I hand out a bunch of magic items, you're not really playing the character anymore. You're just playing all the items.
Yeah, that's true.
And at first I didn't like that, but as I played with him more and more and started to develop more of a role-playing base, I started to understand exactly what he meant, to the point now where I pretty much preach the same thing. It's like, if you're going to hand out a magic item, make it something that's going to make players question whether or not it's a good idea to use it, or that's something that just may straight screw over the party if they use it. But make it rare, Yeah. Oh God, absolutely. No Cal, no Kender.
Like in the Lion and Dragon campaigns that I've run, apart from some of the like very common kind of lower level things that a wizard can make, because in the Lion and Dragon system, wizards don't tend to be, they have a few magical rituals or spells that can be done on the fly, but a lot of what they do is actually not combat casting, but the creation of magical cures or talismans or things like that, right? But aside from those, most characters don't have a magic item for quite some time. And then, if they get to like higher levels, a lot of characters will only have one magic item, right? Or a couple, and if they do, they're like, that becomes a defining part of that character for themselves, and also for the world around them, because magic being very rare, if that there's this knight that has a sword made out of water that he got from killing a monster in some lake monster or something, then that makes him really legendary, right? So it becomes a very special thing just for that character, which is a lot cooler than if that character has like 50 magic items, but nobody gives a crap because, you know, everybody else has 50 magic items.
Right. And one of the things too that was introduced to me in this same concept was it showcases artisans' work versus magical work. For example, there is a particular legendary smith that is part of his regular campaigns, and if you somehow manage to run across this character in one of his games, and you have enough money to pay for one of his weapons, they are of such a high quality make that they give out non-magical pluses because of their quality, because they're made with methods that are known only to him that nobody can duplicate.
Yeah.
And thereafter, other people in the world who recognize that particular maker's weapon will be impressed, because it's like, wow, you have one of his swords.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. And I mean, I have a bit of that in Lion and Dragon too, there, where there you have the Iberian steel and Sheffield swords, you know, which are like made by master craftsmen, right? Super expensive. And so a character who doesn't have a magic item, if he has one of those swords, you know, that's still going to be really impressive, right?
And that also kind of...
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and that also kind of brings in some of like the mystique of the East, as far as, you know, the Japanese swordsmiths who would make, you know, these one-of-a-kind legendary swords that weren't necessarily magic in and of themselves, but because of the high quality of their make and craftsmanship and everything else, they could do things like split helmets and stuff, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, Sadwings, you're referring to Ulfbert, the Viking sword that was made with steel that came from somewhere in Persia, I believe. Yeah, I saw a documentary on that. Good stuff. Yeah, but that's kind of what we're talking about. Special swords and stuff like that are unique almost, that can be recognized not because they're magic, but because their artisanship is so awesome. You know, but if you compare one of those regular swords to, like, say, even a regular +1 magic sword, the +1 magic sword is obviously better.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Well, I mean, that's one of the motivations for one of many motivations for the expansion of medieval trade into the East was because of Damascus steel, right? Which wasn't actually from Damascus at all; it was from the great city of Merv. But you know, to be able to get those swords that were so incredibly impressive just because of the secret of making the Damascus steel, you know, was a big thing from the Crusades. That's something that gets highlighted in my upcoming product, Sword and Caravan, which is going to be my next big book release, which is going to be a whole campaign book for, you know, well, it's I guess for Lion and Dragon, but it's an OSR campaign book. You can use it with any OSR system. That's going to be set. It's going to be set during the Third Crusade and along the Silk Road. You know, so you can run a Crusader campaign if you like, or you can run a campaign of some of the, you know, the very early period after 1193, when the earliest Europeans started traveling the Silk Road. You know, and it was the Silk Road at its very peak, right, just before Genghis Khan came along and razed it all to the ground.
Yeah. And something I haven't used in one of my campaigns, but since you are doing medieval authentic, you might appreciate this and maybe find a use for it. During some of my research, I did come across an entry for a certain knight during the Crusades who was particularly worried about getting injured. So he had the breast of his mail triple linked, so it was actually thicker and heavier up in the chest region than it was anywhere else, because that was commonly where other guys were getting hit. So I don't know if you could incorporate some method of you know, making armor slightly better or customizing existing armor, but that's an idea anyway.
That's an interesting detail. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'll have to think about that.
If I can find the text, I'll dig it up and I'll send you a link to it, because it's in one of my books. So, but that was pretty cool. And Ironcaster, no, I'm not going to start getting into urine facts. I joked one of the other days. I said one of the things you find out when you start studying medieval history is all the different things that people did with urine back in the medieval age.
Tannery for once, right?
Oh, tannery. The barber surgeons would check your urine and taste it.
Yeah.
And apparently alchemy. Urine was.
It was a big ingredient in alchemy. Yeah.
Yeah, and apparently it was better for cooling silver than regular water because of the mineral content.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, and of course we know that boiled down, it would make ammonia, which is good for treating wounds, but it was also used in fulling. The ammonia would get the grease out of the lamb's wool so they could make cloth, and it would.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So. I don't know. It's in Sad Wings, like making gunpowder. And that's saltpeter. That comes from digging out the poop.
Yeah, that's different.
Oh man. Well, I've really enjoyed this. We've gone 2 hours, which is actually an hour longer than I had intended. But I was having so much fun. I hope I haven't eaten up a whole bunch of your time.
No, I've had a good time too. It's been a very interesting. It's nice to spend usually when I'm a guest star on one of these shows, it's for me to complain about the state of the hobby. And today this show was more about talking about game design. I quite like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love to talk about game design, game problems, and things like that. The hobby is going to keep changing. I think it's going to change with every generation. We've seen changes. We've seen at least 3 changes in our lifetimes already, from first edition, second edition, third edition, fourth edition, fifth edition. They've all changed with the times, and various other TTRPG companies out there have tried to do this as well, and with varying degrees of success. And we've seen how many of them have actually lasted from their initial creation. I think our Talsorian Games is still around from the old days.
Palladium.
White Wolf.
Palladium.
Yeah, Palladium is still around. Palladium refuses to die. That's a fun system. But like some of the big boys like White Wolf, they're gone.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of giants that vanished because they couldn't adjust, and some of it was changes in the culture, but a lot of it was also just changes in the industry, right? Like the nowadays, the ability to self-publish or to publish with a small press publisher changes everything, and that's why I don't think there is going to be some other great rival to Wizards of the Coast. I mean, what might happen? I mean, in theory, if D&D 5th edition, let's say Wizards for whatever reason, or Hasbro rather, cancels D&D, says we're going to just put it aside and not make anything new for a decade or so. Then there might be one big company that comes up providing some kind of an alternative. But I think largely the new model is going to be D&D dominating the mainstream of the industry, and then everybody else creating these subcultures like the OSR that produce stuff and that people can make their stuff and in some cases make a living out of it, like I do, though that's rare.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny. I was just mentioning this to one of my friends the other day. Living in Texas as I do travel around now and again. And you might remember a little game called Starfleet Battles.
Yeah, of course.
Well, the Amarillo Game Design Bureau is still around in Amarillo, Texas. It is actually, the building is still there.
Starfleet Battles has been around forever, and they've always been super good at it because they found their niche and they stuck to it, and that's a big secret. I like Palladium is the same way, right? Palladium said, well, we're making games that are going to appeal to a 14-year-old, or to a 50-year-old that remembers being 14, whichever of the two. But but that they'll have like monsters and demons and mecha and rock and roll and pictures of alien women with big titties and then that's occasional boobies, as I would say, right? But nothing. They've never gone beyond that particular product concept, and they've always been successful at it. Lots of action and lots of really cool cartoon type art, and badass mecha and things like that, and then that's what sells. And Starfleet Battles has done similarly by focusing on like this system for wargaming Star Trek ship fights, and it's
exactly
and it works, because it's very dangerous to try to like go with whatever is the trend of the moment, because the trend of the moment will also disappear in the next moment, hence you get woke, go broke,
Very much so. Well, all right. Well, I've had a great time. I hope you have too, and I definitely hope that we can get you back on the show at some point, because I think it'd be great to talk some more about your stuff, especially whenever what is it, Lion and Caravan, was it, or Sword and Caravan?
Sword and Caravan.
Yeah, when Sword and Caravan releases, I definitely want to hear from you on that one.
Excellent. All right, will do. It should be coming out before the middle of the year, so it should be sometime between now and June.
Nice. All right, I'll keep an eye out for it.
It's going to have a lot of really cool hex maps in it that I didn't make, but that the publisher is making. So you're going to get like really, really careful hex maps of the entire Middle East and the whole Silk Road. So that by itself is almost worth the price. But then also a gazetteer of all these ancient cities, some of which people don't even remember anymore. And lots of stuff taken from local mythology and history, just like all of my products in that kind of range.
Samarkand and Khawarizm and all these places.
Yeah, the Khwarizmian Shahs. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, anytime you want to come back, just let me know, or get a hold of me on Twitter, and we'll make it happen. Because I've really had a great time. I think the audience really enjoyed having you on. And do you have any closing comments or anything you want to say? Or?
Yeah, just thanks for having me on board, and I hope that if anyone watching was not familiar with my products, check them out. I hope that I think this show actually did a really good job of highlighting some of what's good about them. So yeah, thanks for that.
Oh yeah, I want a second add in on this right here for Sad Wings wanting a harem building supplement. Yeah, there you go.
Well, there's rules in Sword and Caravan. There's like a whole bunch of like these random tables for like locations and things. So there's rules for like randomly rolling up the contents and people and services in caravanserais. These caravan houses that were in between the cities in the deserts of the Silk Road. And some of them have harems. So
that'll be great. All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and close up. Thank you all very much for showing up for this. It's at a different time. I know we usually do 9 a.m. in the morning and 2 a.m. on Tuesdays, but because of scheduling, we went with this time, and we still had a good number of people show up and get a lot of audience engagement. So I think it was a success on every level. Thank you all, and we will see you next time here on Dungeons and Discussions.
Look, the Dungeons and Dragons ride!